Okay, so we are live, at least for testing purposes. Um, just gonna make sure that the window is working.
Sounds good, and I'm on the YouTube page, but obviously not behind the scenes.
Right. Okay. You can see it's live.
Yep, that I can say.
Okay. Well, that's good. Okay. Yeah, we're live. Okay, that's good. And the chat seems to be going. Okay. So that looks to be fine. Good. 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 Let's see if I can get the embed code to work actually right now before we start. I'm not sure if this will work, but if it does, it'd be nice. Because then I could just link people to, well, then anyone who's in the Lighthouse Hockey thread will get it. Where's the edit button? There it is. So if this worked, okay, that's working. Good. Cool. Let's see if I can embed the chat. Okay, so I've embedded the YouTube, but I don't think I can embed the chat right now. Or at least I need to work more on figuring out how that works. Well, that's nice. So anyone who goes to the Lighthouse Hockey page will actually see that. Mind saying something right now? I want to test something.
Yeah, sure thing. Let me know if you can hear me on your end.
Yeah, I can, and it looks like my streaming system claims it is working. Okay, so I'm going to tweet this out.
Cool. I'm actually muted. I've muted the YouTube so I don't go in a circle, but I can unmute it and test it out.
No,
Let's see if my computer hears me.
Okay. But you can see. Tweet this out. saying that 8 are watching right now, so if you are here, please feel free to say something in the chat. We're just getting everything working right now and tweeting out the link. Apologies, we'll be probably like 2 minutes late with starting. But I don't want that to be there. I want that to be on this one.
Also, if you can confirm that I'm coming through, that would be excellent. If you can just something on chat to make sure that we're getting both people coming through the stream.
Okay, so that's good. Okay. Okay, so I can do that now. I don't need this one up right now. I got your similarity calculator up as well, because that was fun.
Yeah, the very finest of Aki analytics.
Oh yes, quality. Hey, it works to some extent. Okay, give it 2 more minutes and then we'll start. So if anyone here has any comments about our talking or whatnot, please feel free to say hi. So I've got a couple of prospect pages open here, as well as QMJHL stats. Why this default is standard HL? Hockey analysis, Corsica, more hockey analysis, and believe it or not, NHL faceoff stats, because God bless. Figured we'd be thorough.
How else are we going to find out whether or not he's clutch and can really contribute in the big moments?
Oh yes, it's really key here. I noticed one of the, we'll talk about this later, but one of these scouting reports talked about his face-off prowess, so I had to include it. Needless to say, it didn't quite work out that way last year. But okay, 1 more minute and we will officially be live. Officially be live. So YouTube is telling me 11 people are watching right now. No, 10. There we go. We're dropping one. So hopefully they're able to actually say something. I'm hoping. Okay. YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. Oh, it's fine. Whatever. Cool. It's pretty funny to see Beauvillier ranked above Anthony Manthon on the prospect list. Good times. Okay. So let's begin. To anyone watching, we're starting right now. Feel free to comment in chat. The plan is to answer some questions later on at the end of the stream. Though if you say something that pertains to something we're talking about straight out, we may address it as we go along. Also, if you can't hear either myself or Alex, please let us know in the chat. It's our only way of telling. Otherwise, it's going to sound really silly if I'm talking one-sided or you're hearing no one and just seeing some random stat pages. I said this in the Lighthouse Hockey post, but I do want to say it again. Unfortunately, due to copyright laws, we will not be showing, at least at this point, video of play during the season. I would love to basically highlight some neutral zone play or whatnot that I've tracked, but unfortunately, I'm 100% sure that will result in a copyright strike, and I prefer to not get my channel taken down. Maybe in the future, if there's some streaming stuff that I can use, I would gladly use it, but unfortunately for now, this is basically limited to stuff that is not NHL video. So let's begin. So my name, my handle online is Garik16. With me today is Mr. Alex Novet, on Twitter as Ghost of Niles, and also a writer at HockeyGraphs. Uh, Alex is another Port Islanders fan, though he lives in Northern California because he wanted to get the hell away from us.
A little bit of that, a little bit of a wife enrolling in law school, but either way, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on their first ever Isles Videocast episode.
Glad to have you. If you haven't seen the advertisements and somehow got here anyhow, today we'll be talking very specifically about one player, Islander forward Anthony Beauvillier. Beauvillier played both wing and center in the last season, so we'll be talking about him as both of those things. Um, and really, the goal here is to talk about, and the goal here for these video casts is to try and talk about in depth about some of the Islanders in particular specific subjects. So for today, we're going to be looking at Beauvillier because, quite simply put, as a 19-year-old prospect, the team probably thinks him as pretty important. And so the question is really, well, are they right to do so? What does it mean? And what has he done already? So let's start basically. Let's try and do things in order here. So the plan today is the first part of the plan is for us to talk about what was expected of Beauvillier coming in. What was the scouting report? Well, there's one person here. What was the scouting report? What was expected of him? How was he, expected out of the QMJHL? What type of prospect he was, etc., etc. Basically, we're going over what we would have thought going into last season, because that's the way we can get some context on what happened last season. Um, so Beauvillier was drafted in the first round, the end of the first round, number 28, 2015. As you all know, the Islanders wound up trading Griffin Reinhart for 2 picks, and they wound up trading up from the second pick they acquired from the Edmonton Oilers to acquire Beauvillier at number 28. Beauvillier was drafted out of the QMJHL, so that's Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, for those of you who somehow are listening to this but don't know what that is. And he is a June birthday, which means he is fairly young for his draft class. We'll talk, that's going to be very relevant and come up pretty much often. The draft class cutoffs are roughly September. So he's in a fairly young side. So he still hasn't even turned 20 as of today. And he will turn 20 next season. Well, in June, next month. Okay, so what was there out there? And feel free to step in anytime you have something here. So I've put a bunch of articles out there. Basically, this is not the right one. Basically going through Anthony Beauvillier pre-draft. A favorite of mine, this is the Canucks Army scouting report, which also has some quotes from other scouting reports. Originally written by Reese Jessup, also known as That's Offside, and currently hired by the Florida Panthers. So this is a guy who's obviously been employed by a professional hockey team. So he knows some things, maybe, or at least some teams do think he do. And this was back in the day where Canucks Army used, and they still use a similar system, not the same one, a system called PCS to project also the probability of success for each possible draft pick. And using that system as well as their own thoughts, they actually ranked Beauvillier at the time the number 12 overall prospect in the 2015 draft. And their comments were basically, so this is their comments, not the ones from other quotes, is that A, one of the youngest players, B, he nearly led, he was one of the top, he was the first overall in terms of the Q draft eligibles in points and primary assists. And adjusting for age and error, he trailed only some guys named Connor McDavid, Mitch Marner, and Dylan Strome in points per game. He was a top face-off man. Okay, and the key thing here, one of the things I want to focus on also, is that he was a shot monster. They don't really have Corsi in the Q, or at any junior league, but the Q was like the first of the Canadian hockey leagues to actually track shots on goal taken by each player. And Beauvillier led the Q. He hit over 5 shots on goal per game. This is basically while he was 17 years old, because he didn't turn 18 until after the draft, because he was super young. Um, and obviously, getting a ton of shots on goal is generally considered a good sign for offense, because while shooting percentage is fairly random, um, and there is some skill obviously there, getting shots on goal is a bit more of a skill type thing. I mean, I don't want to say that shooting percentage is how good a shooter you are is not random, but is more fluctuates. And so a guy who gets a ton of shots on goal is going to have less swings in terms of how many goals he scores per season than some guy who gets very few shots on goal. So your Josh Bailey's versus your, say, Anders Lee's. Um, more shots, more goals. Very simple thing here. Um, Other scouting reports, this was the Canucks Army one, but other scouting reports going more scouty would say things like a dynamic scoring center with good hockey sense. Not large, but makes up for it in speed, skill, and cunning. Uh, Efficient as a passer as he's a goal scorer. Needs to work on discipline and getting stronger. Or can play in multiple spots. Adaptable, reads plays everywhere on ice and situation well. Quick on his feet. Can complement many different players and very valuable. So this was going into the draft. Um, Anything in particular you think I'm missing here, or?
For me, one of the things that really stood out for Beauvillier at this point is just how entirely essential and basically alone he was on that junior offense. That it talks a little bit about it in the Canucks Army piece, that he had more than 30 points more than the second highest scorer on the team. And a lot of the top prospects we've seen coming out of juniors the past few years have been on really powerhouse teams where you'll have two top 10 picks on the same line really making things happen. And Beauvillier had none of that help. This was almost a Taylor Hall situation back in the Oilers years a few years ago, where he is doing almost all of the offense for this team. He is the driver of it, and also really pushing a lot in doing, really everything on the possession side, the shot generation side, and actually scoring. He's the one who did all of that, and it'll be interesting to see moving forward how much of a factor that plays in when he's going from, these amazing stats in a time when he doesn't have necessarily great quality of teammates there. And that's something sort of like the birthday stats, which I know we'll talk about, where, we've seen in the juniors that players who are especially young in the draft class scoring at the same rate as equal peers tend to then, that's a positive sign that they'll surpass those peers once they're the same age and reach the same development. And I think in the same way, not to say that Bo is, in the top, that Strome Marner conversation, but certainly he's somebody who might be even a bit better than these super high point totals based on the fact that he was really doing that all alone.
Right, exactly. Which also is another reason, just a minor tangent, but I do think it's relevant here, is that NHL teams do not have as many scouts as you'd think. In fact, I think a lot of us think this is kind of ridiculous. They employ far fewer scouts than, say, equivalent sports teams do in other leagues and other sports. And so it tends to be, in my opinion, that for this reason, you wind up with things where players who are playing on teams without other top prospects may get underscouted and maybe underranked. Whereas team players on teams, even though they may have, say, other great players, and that may make people less, trusting of them, at the same time, those players are more scouted. And so Beauvillier had basically very, very few quality players with him, and that may have been why he fell so far at the time, or it may speak to him being a little bit underrated. I mean, this is just speculating here, but it's definitely possible. So that was Beauvillier going into his first draft class, going into the draft year. And Beauvillier spent his first year back in the queue. So this was his age 8. I mean, it was technically his age 19 season or age 18 season because he's so young. Again, as Alex pointed out, and he managed to actually improve. His scoring went up. So Beauvillier put up 94 points in 67 games as a draft eligible. He played 20 less games, but only put up 15 less points and almost matched his goal scoring in 20 less games as a sophomore. At the same time, he actually increased his shots per game fractionally, and his assist rate also slightly improved. So basically, all of his numbers improved. And one of the things that we like to see from draft plus one prospects, and you don't always see this with successful players, but it's usually a good sign if it happens, and it's a bad sign if it doesn't, is that draft plus one players, because obviously they're now one of the older players in the CHL, but not the oldest, you expect to see them basically dominate or take another leap forward. And Beauvillier did. He definitely met that criteria. So obviously that was a humongous sign. And so, for example, Corey Pronman upped his ranking of Beauvillier. He had him 66 of the top 100 prospects going to his draft year, and he had him now 31. And this isn't just comparing him just to his draft year, but basically everyone who's not in the NHL. So again, just following this quote here, he finished 10th in the league in shots and goals, dominated during the playoffs. Speed, hands, shot, work ethic, all grades above average. Very smart player, can make top end reads at a quick pace. He can play any role, and his play away from the puck is quite good, even from a smaller guy. As he bulks up, he'll start to look more projectable as a defensive asset in the pro ranks. So, at least from this quote from the scout and Pronman, there was some thought that Beauvillier would be good defensively as well, which is obviously not something you expect to see from many 19-year-olds. Well, he was still 18 at this point. And that was basically what the scouting report was. So was probably a good bit why the Isles thought he was ready this year. Anything else I'm missing?
Nope, I think that covers it. I was just looking up some comparison numbers, and to give you a sense, because I always find it interesting, especially with these first round picks, it's tough to get a sense of how they're progressing in juniors. And I was just looking it up and comparing it to Hosang and Dow Cole just to get a feel for, what is that progression. And so to give sort of a comparison, the raw numbers are a little bit tricky because they're in different leagues, but Dow Cole year to year pretty much put up the same production, improved a tiny bit in terms of total points in his draft plus one season. Hosang, even though he had lower raw numbers, did jump up a bunch. And again, now look at where those two players are, where Hosang seems to be just about a lock to make it onto the roster again this season. Dow Cole probably is not, and I think at this point is not somebody that the team is really counting on to be a key piece moving forward. And so you look at where Beauvillier fits in there, and it's very similar to that Hosang progression of really advancing on those stats and overall just those positive signs you want to see.
Right. I mean, Hosang, in fact, I was a bit of a skeptic of Hosang coming into here because he didn't quite improve as much as I had hoped. Judging, this is an unfair comparison because he was always considered a much better prospect than Beauvillier, but I have called up here Matt Barzil's numbers because Barzil was taken the same year as Beauvillier, and the two were, of course, were both from the running for basically one forward spot this offseason. Barzil, of course, went from basically 57 points and 44, again, showed a humongous improvement. So both of those Islanders picks showed huge improvements from draft class to draft plus one. And Barzil, again, when he got back and was healthy for Seattle this season, took another leap, at least in the playmaking point of view, as well as, of course, the playoffs where he put up some monster numbers. Though I think Seattle is getting killed in the Memorial Cup at the moment. But that's off topic there. So yeah, so as we've both said here, the key thing you want to see from draft plus one, and if they stay another year, draft plus two, is taking a big leap, because at that point, if you're a good prospect, you should be dominating. You should literally be basically killing these guys, because these are guys who are 16, 17, 18. You're the old guys. They're still growing. You should easily be able to take them if you're worthy. And Beauvillier did that. So it made a lot of sense for the Islanders to think Beauvillier would compete in camp for an NHL spot. So let's actually talk about Beauvillier last year in the NHL. So just Beauvillier is, I think, now the first Islander player to play a full season draft plus one since Nino Niederreiter. I think that's right. I can't think of another one who played a full season draft plus one. Am I missing someone? I don't think so.
No, I think that would be it. That was the last one.
Right. Because since then, Ryan Strome did not play until a draft plus two season, or draft plus three season. Ryan Strome made it at age 20. Sorry, this is draft plus two that I'm talking about here. So Ryan Strome didn't play until draft plus three, and of course he started in the AHL. Josh Hosang and Mike Delcall, same thing, draft plus three, and Delcall didn't make the NHL. Who else? Anders Lee was a college player. Brock Nelson, also a college player. Yeah, so Nino Niederreiter was the last player. The Islanders have traditionally been very conservative with their prospects. I suspect if the CHL, NHL agreement, so the rule is basically for a player who was in the Canadian Hockey League at the time of the draft, some minor exceptions here or there, cannot play in the American Hockey League until they're basically too old for the CHL. The agreement sucks. It hurts development. You have a lot of these guys who are so good, but not good enough to make the NHL straight out, but probably too good for juniors. I mean, we're basically saying, like I just said, we're expecting Beauvillier to dominate these kids, and it's hard to believe that him dominating kids, or Barzal dominating kids, is better for their development than, say, playing against older players, but not NHL quality players in the AHL. It's really hard to believe that. But the rules basically say that you can play in the NHL while you're still CHL eligible if you were in the CHL beforehand, but you cannot play in the AHL. You have to be, if you're going to do development, you've got to be in juniors. So basically, the Islanders have basically erred on the side of sending players back to juniors. But with Beauvillier and Barzal both dominating, the Islanders thought that one or two of them could make it into camp, especially with Franz Nielsen, Kyle Okposo, all those guys leaving. There were spots. And Beauvillier obviously was the guy who seized the spots. He played in 66 games, managed 24 points, 9 goals, 15 assists. Those numbers aren't great, but not terrible. Managed only 101 shots on goal, so less than 2 shots per game. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So I just want to talk about Beauvillier. I want to start with even strength numbers first. So let's just talk about scoring first. So like I said, in juniors, he was considered a bit of a shot monster. So I have here his 5v5 stats, courtesy of a hockey analysis. And Beauvillier was basically in the middle of the team's forwards in terms of getting shots on goal. Getting even shots off. Shots on goal was also in the middle here. So he took about 11.7 shots per 60, had even strength, and he got a little less than 7 shots on goal per 60. So that comes down to basically somewhere around 6th or 7th on the team among forwards. So, your top players on the team are some guy named John Tavares. Then Cal Clutterbuck is actually a shot monster, but Cal Clutterbuck is historically a terrible shooter. So enough about that, but not really counting him. And then you've got Brock Nelson, Andrew Ladd, and Anders Lee, guys you think of as your offensive players here. But none of them were shot monsters, and Beauvillier wasn't either. So that's one area where he didn't quite match the scouting report. Again, feel free to chime in on this part. I don't mean to be monologuing.
Yeah, for me, I'd say big picture, Beauvillier had the overall phases, at least in my perception of him this season. The first one, you had training camp and the first couple of weeks of the season. And honestly, I was shocked and super impressed. I did not expect him to make the team at all. And while you never know exactly what the coaches are seeing or how that decision is going to be made, that definitely overall is a positive sign. When I was honestly sure that he was going to be sent back down to juniors, as much as they did have spots, they still had Barzal and other young guys who were ahead of him and various depth guys that they love and would necessarily want to take those places. And for the first couple of weeks, he really did seem to be doing pretty well. Then after that second phase, he basically hit a wall. And I'd say looking through it, and we can go through the detailed numbers, he was basically a middle to bad third liner throughout all of that. His shot attempts were in the tank. His defense was pretty poor throughout, and just looked like a 19-year-old who was skilled but overmatched in the league. And then the third step is the era of Doug Wade. And there, he still struggled, but you started to see some more positive signs. His shot attempts went up a bit. He started getting a little bit of power play time and was doing some decent things there. And so, it's one where after a lot of ups and downs, his expectations for me are pretty much in the same place they were at the beginning of the season. And overall, he struggled, but still showed some promising signs throughout.
Okay, yeah, I think that about. We'll get into some of that a little bit more, but yeah, definitely. He definitely struggled for a bit, especially early on. I'm not exactly as positive about him in the weight era as you are. I'll get into some of that in a little bit. And to be fair, he definitely had not necessarily the best line mates for a while there. So just looking at who he played with a lot, I mean, he played a lot with Brock Nelson. I'm going to retract that. He had not consistent line mates. Basically, everyone who wasn't John Tavares, Anders Lee, and Josh Bailey was sort of in a salad blender in terms of who their line mates were. And so Beauvillier played 817 minutes at even strength last year, and less than half of that, less than 3/8 of that was basically with one player, and that was Brock Nelson. And then you had, and incidentally, he didn't particularly play well with Nelson. We'll get to that in a second as well. And then after Nelson and Strome, you have Josh Hosang, who only played 140 minutes to him as his next biggest forward line mate, which is a bit of a, it's a bit harder to ask a guy to play basically with so many different players and not consistently. And they didn't really find a place for him consistently. And they also split him up between center and wing repeatedly, which again is a bit tricky. Actually, just talking about center before we dive into the Corsi possession stats, I did want to bring up, I mentioned the prospect scouting, mentioned that Beauvillier was a strong face-off man. There's been plenty of research showing that players' face-offs are something that rookies don't get. Generally, it takes a few years for guys to get their face-off percentages up to where they should be. And Beauvillier really showed that. He didn't take a ton. He only took about 297 face-offs, but he went up with a 41% face-off rate, which is horrendous. Now, mind you, Ryan Strome had a 42% last year, so not great. But at the same time, it's just kind of awkward that to see 41% there. But again, rookies tend to do poorly in face-offs, so that is one area we expect him to improve just out of natural what's going to happen. It's just sort of, as you expect. It's one of the areas where we very clearly see improvements in terms of players as they go on. So,
yeah, that's one I wouldn't read too much into, just for all the reasons you expressed, that as much as anything else, it's a sign of who's got the experience and who just has the body maturity and the strength to win those. And if you're looking at it as a proxy for, just winning any puck battle, one thing I found interesting, and we can dip a little bit into neutral zone stats, is that in Corey Snyder's very limited sample of Islander games, so this is not a ton, but in the few games he has tracked, that Bo was 5th on the team in recovered dump-ins, despite having way fewer actual dump-ins attempts than most of the rest of the team. And so, at this point, too small a sample to really mean anything, but a decent proxy that says that, the face-offs are not necessarily a huge warning sign that he's not winning pucks and fighting boards or anything else that it might overrepresent.
Right. No, definitely about that. You bring up neutral zone stats, which is good. I'm going to bring up. I think I've tracked more Islander games than Corey has. So I don't track. recoveries. So that's good stuff that I don't have. I actually have different results than Corey on entries, but I have a higher sample. We all track slightly differently, so that accounts for it. We'll get into that in a second. But yeah, I mean, again, there's signs definitely. These are things that you expect to improve with time. Again, we want to stress the fact that Beauvillier is a young 19-year-old. Was very young for his draft class. Not the youngest necessarily, but pretty young here. So you expect him to improve more than a guy who is old for his draft class. I mean, there's some gap between some people in his draft class where they're almost a year apart. And that's a big deal, especially for a young kid. He's further away from his prime and was already being tasked against NHLers, which is rough. So, moving on to, as you started bringing up, the possession numbers for Beauvillier were not good. Beauvillier was basically worse than the team in terms of Corsi. Now, for those of you who don't know what Corsi is, or again, I expect people who found this stream to know what this is, but Corsi is basically just plus minus, but for shots, and for all shots, not just shots on goal. So, what are the players getting more shots directed toward their opponent's net than their opponents are while they're on the ice? Corsi is important for several reasons. It's a proxy for possession in the offensive zone, and more importantly, it just correlates with more productive team play. More correlates really with winning to a better extent than goals, because there's many more shots than goals, and directing shots toward the net is basically the way you score goals, and it's a better indicator of it than goals itself. So your best players, you want your players to have over 50% Corsi, which means you take more shots on net than your opponents. So take more shots than your opponents do. And the Islanders weren't very good at that last year. Only 4 Islanders went above 50%. You can guess who some of them were. John Tavares. I have this up here right now. I'm not sure if you can read it as clearly, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. John Tavares led the team in terms of forwards with 53%, because John Tavares is fucking amazing. Pardon my French. Anders Lee was second. Josh Bailey was also above 50%. Given that all three of the guys played together, it shouldn't be a surprise. Anders Lee has traditionally been a strong Corsi guy. Josh Hosang, who will be the subject of a different video cast, was the fourth Islander who was above 50%. But Anthony Beauvillier was basically last. Basically, with Anthony Beauvillier on the ice, the Islanders were getting greatly outshot by a large margin. To put it in perspective, 44% is basically worse than the Arizona Coyotes were, or the Colorado Avalanche were in general last year. Now, obviously, when the worst players in those teams were playing, they were worse than Beauvillier, but you want to be playing at a much higher level than that. And this suggests that whether Beauvillier was defensively responsible in juniors, he wasn't quite yet here, and he was struggling a bit. And as with most rookies, he wasn't getting pushed. Some rookies get basically tons of time in the offensive zone if they can help it. If zone starts, how effective they are is not as much as people think, but Beauvillier still got more offensive zone faceoffs than defensive ones, and he still was struggling.
It also was the case where none of those Corsi numbers were really redeemed by anything on the quality side. And obviously quality is squishier, and we don't need to get into it too deeply, but his numbers were even a little bit worse if you were looking at expected goals for percentage, which that expected part means taking in a bit of that quality component. Also, if you look on hockeyviz.com, Micah McCurdy has some good charts showing overall position of where shots occurred when a player was on or off the ice. And basically, the Islanders got shots much farther away from the net when he was on, and their opponents got shots much closer to the net when he was on the ice than when he was off. And so just across the board, no matter what your preferred metric of understanding contributions there, he seriously struggled in all of those elements.
Yeah, correct. I'm not pulling up Corsica because Corsica actually takes a second for me to load, because Corsica has the expected goals percentage, which Alex is referencing, but just looking at scoring chances, for example. So this is percentage, same thing as Corsi, but only looking at the high percentage scoring chances. Again, we see our big top four of Tavares, Lee, Hosang, and Bailey, and Beauvillier is basically just above Steven Giunta, and was getting massively outchanced. It wasn't working. Um, these are things that, again, we were hoping would improve. But basically, with Beauvillier out there on the ice, you basically had the opposing teams getting more and more shots, and also, honestly, the scoring hit numbers are worse than the shots. So not only were they getting more shots off than the Islanders, they were getting better shots. Um, so it didn't work. And speaking of who it didn't work with, when he played again, he didn't play a majority of his time with anybody, but say Brock Nelson and Ryan Strome, he played a good deal with, and they really suffered while playing with him. Now Nelson didn't have a great time with many players. He did not have a good season, but he, in this terms at least, but the two of them together were at 41% Corsi, which is just abysmal. And that's really a player who, you could say it. Obviously, chemistry is the thing. I'm not saying it's not, but your hope for Beauvillier is that Nelson and Strome are the type of guys he'd be playing with, and it didn't work. The numbers are just bad with most players. His best numbers were again with Josh Hosang, but even those, and I do want to bring those up here. A lot of his play at the end of the season, and I see someone in chat, Mr. Backsmasher is correct. He did average a lot more shots per game near the end, including he had one game where he had like 7 shots on goal. And his numbers were much better with Josh Hosang. He had a 49.5% Corsi, which is still below average, but much closer to average. But Hosang was significantly better without him. And a lot of the times, when the two of them together, they had, say, Anders Lee in their wing, and that didn't work out too well. Anders Lee is, again, a good possession guy. So I'm not as convinced necessarily that he was improving in this regard toward the end. That doesn't mean he wasn't improving, but he had a better player. Josh Hosang was basically playing phenomenally. And again, 49.5% is a far prize, far better than Brock Nelson, but it was still dragging Hosang down a bit.
Yep, I think those are all fair points. I think, no matter how you slice it, he had a bad season. And if you want, you can look at those, past 10, 15 games and say it's signs of optimism. But even if he kept performing at that level, it would be a disappointment. And there's definitely a lot of reason to believe that was less him figuring it out and turning things on, and more him being in a really good situation compared to where he was previously, with Hosang just on fire and getting ice time with Lee. So I think that all makes sense. One thing that'll be interesting to see is that was also when he was getting power play time, and not so much in reference to his power play skill itself, but in terms of where he stands with the coaching staff. It'll be interesting to see how that goes moving forward with Wade in charge for a full season, because, it's could be just a sign of them playing around with the power play in the last few days and with injuries racking up, or it could be something where Wade has a little bit more trust in Beauvillier, and that's something that'll be interesting to wait and see moving forward.
Yeah, Beauvillier was basically only an even strength player last year. He played 3 minutes of 4v5 shorthanded play and only 31 minutes of 5v4 power play time. The numbers aren't great in the 5v4. He had 30 minutes. He had only 5 shot attempts and 1 point. But it's still a very tiny sample. Really, really tiny. And obviously, he basically didn't play any shorthanded time worth a damn. Basically. At the same time, the team, you expect them to get more of that. Again, that's a rookie thing. The Owlsers put Hosang on power play pretty quickly, but Hosang was considered more an offensive force, and again, is a year older. And you expect, I'd be surprised if Beauvillier isn't prominently on second power play unit coming into this season. But it's hard to know. Obviously, depends on expansion drafts and whatnot. But I expect them to play more special teams. And
Yeah, I think that would be my expectation too. And ultimately, with this limited time on ice, I don't think you can read anything into these power play stats, like you were saying, other than he has a coach who's willing to put him out there on the second power play unit, and we'll see where that goes.
right, the Isles. Incidentally, I've tracked about 45 neutral zone games for the Islanders. Beauvillier was not remarkable in any way in terms of carrying the puck in. I had him at 40% carrying rate, which is poor for a forward, even with my tracking. Um, and the Islanders, it actually was slightly better than the Islanders in average, was 39%, but I think the Islanders forwards were better in general um, than that, because the defenseman basically did not carry the puck in unless your name is Nick Leddy, in which case you're a freak. Um, but, again, it's an area of improvement. Obviously, you also had Jack Capuano preaching a more dump-heavy strategy than you would with, I suspect, next year. Um, and you did have some players basically seem to open it up. I've only tracked a few games with Josh Hosang, for example, but Hosang's first 3 games, he barely carried the puck in at all, and then he just started carrying the puck in constantly. And given the trust that Hosang got to do that, I suspect Beauvillier will start getting a little more leeway to go forward, which is more what we expect from him. So I think we've gone through pretty well what happened with Beauvillier last year.
Yep, I think so. You want to kick it off and talk about what are your expectations for him next season and moving forward?
Yeah, I think this is the right time for that. So Beauvillier, just talking scoring first. Obviously, you expect a little bit of a leap. He scored 24 points last year, which is not bad for a rookie at all, mind you, even ignoring the bad play elsewhere, especially when he had no special teams time. Those are fine numbers. They're not really what you want from a second liner, but they're fine thirds. They're okay third slash and certainly fine fourth line numbers. Um, and again, you expect that to improve. So you expect something like 30 points at least next season, which would be fine. Um, I'm very interested to see, now that he's got a full season under his belt with the older players, just like the face-off thing, whether he gets more courage. It's funny, the Islanders have had. I'm also curious to know if he'll even start in the NHL next year. I'm going to be honest, starting with that. The Islanders have a whole bunch of contracts right now, and a lot of players who, I think I said this in the the trial stream from last week, 2 weeks ago. The Islanders could probably use a bunch of new forwards who are solid possession but not great guys who might be cheap. And if they manage to acquire even a few of those, Beauvillier, who's AHL eligible for the first time and does not require waivers, is very likely to start the season in the A. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But assuming he comes back up at some point, which I would imagine he would, because the team does really depend upon him, will be depending upon him breaking out to some extent. I do basically wonder. Um, the Islanders have had trouble under Capuano with guys from freshman to sophomore year, really sophomore to junior year, sort of taking big steps back. And Bo started off poorly. But then you had a guy, and I need to bring up this comparison now because, again, we've talked about this the last 19-year-old since the guy, Nino Niederreiter, who was sent to the AHL coming after his 19-year-old season, was unhappy in the AHL, played good but not great enough to get worthy of a call-up, got traded to Minnesota, and it hurts to say it, but Nino has turned out to be one of the most underrated players in the AHL, and certainly a terrific, terrific forward. Now, the two do not profile anything alike. I have to say this right here. Nino had one of the most hilariously unlucky shooting performances as a 19-year-old of anyone I've ever seen. One of the lowest shooting percentages in a decade for a player who played that long. He also played with some goddamn abysmal line mates. I mean, Jay Pandolfo and Zdeno Konopka and Marty Reisner, not Marty Reisner, Jay Pandolfo, Zdeno Konopka, and Matt Martin were some dreadful line mates. My goodness. So Beauvillier obviously got more opportunities than Nino did. And so it's sort of hard to compare them. They're not really comparable players. So I don't want to say that. So since Nino succeeded so much, that doesn't mean that Beauvillier will. But at the same time, it does show necessarily that 19-year-olds, it's a bit rough for them to be in the NHL. And again, some of them succeed right away, some don't, and some don't succeed afterwards as well. Teams can make mistakes. Um, but I do think you'll see the upgraded points. I think possession wise, he should get better. I mean, he's starting pretty much at rock bottom from that. I expect him to have a better knowledge of what to do, as well as be physically stronger. There's sort of these two things that upgrade when you're aging. Is that you gain more knowledge, which makes you a better player, and you bulk up and become more physically a better player. And then, of course, as you age past your prime, you may gain more knowledge, but you have less knowledge to gain, and your physical skills deteriorate. And obviously, as a young player for Draft Plus 2, Beauvillier has more physical growth to make, and the experience will also come. So you have to expect him to improve, only because it's not like he put up, like say Josh Ho saying, there's not really a place to drop. Whether he improves enough to be a key element of the team next year is another question, and I'm not even sure about that. I can see him staying in the AHL all year.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. I think it'll be tough to really see where he slots in until the expansion draft, just because we know inevitably the Islanders are going to have some moving pieces, so we'll have to wait and see there. And then beyond that, I think I pretty much agree with you on all of those points where, by all accounts, he should be taking some sort of step forward. And hopefully that is a step forward in the NHL. If that step forward is, being in the AHL and just lighting it on fire and being put in that top line, role like he was in juniors, and obviously it doesn't make sense for him to be in that role in the NHL just yet, but I definitely don't see it as a disaster if he's there and really putting up numbers, and that could be helpful to make sure that as you hope for his development, he's a guy who's really pushing towards that offensive creativity and not, someone where we've seen the Islanders in the past where, you're getting third or fourth line mates and third or fourth line ice time, so you develop that sort of skill set that, whatever system lets his creativity flourish and, hopefully keeps him in that mindset of looking to put up points, I think is going to be a positive development.
Yeah, I think that's right. Hold on a second.
Yeah, since we're both big neutral zone fans, I'll also be curious to see, I think for the Islanders overall, how the neutral zone play goes, but especially for Beauvillier. I've heard, and I don't have great numbers about this, that he really was a pretty strong neutral zone player in juniors, and that's something that I would hope that we see team-wide, but especially for him, a little bit more of that confidence to carrying the puck, because that's something with where a skill set like his is something that he can really take advantage of that. And so hopefully that'll be something that on top of the usual numbers, I'll definitely be hoping to see improvements throughout next season.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to see how the neutral zone numbers improve. It's funny. I haven't seen it again. I've only been tracking it for a couple seasons now, and we haven't had that many kids. We've had basically no kids at Beauvillier's age, so seeing improvements. The improvement I expect to see from this is something that is new territory for me. The 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds the Islanders have played, and Ryan Strome and some other guys, haven't really changed that much from year to year in terms of neutral zone play, but I'm curious to see if that is the same with Beauvillier. Obviously, it was very different in juniors. And again, new coach means that development should be different. And I think it's such a big cloud over all of our projections and whatnot when you don't really know what you expect from Doug Weight going into his first full year as a coach. And that can make a big difference. So I do want to get if we have. Let's see, how many people are actually watching right now?
Looks like about a dozen or so right now. So
Yeah, I see 13.
who has questions?
So if you have questions, please say them in the chat right now or tweet at me at Garik16. We'd love to answer them, mainly about Beauvillier, but of course, you have other questions. Oh, I have. No, that's old tweets there. Yeah.
So I'll start out with a question while we wait and see what comes in. We'll go into full hot take mode and say, what is your long-term projection for Beauvillier? Obviously, we don't know. There's a ton of uncertainty, but if you're gazing into the crystal ball and taking your best, guess, where in the Islanders' future lineup do you see him?
Hmm. It's obviously a tricky question. I was very high for the same reasons as the Canucks Army guys and Beauvillier when he was drafted. It's funny, I actually looked up the Lighthouse Hockey post where drafted, and I actually my first comment there is actually a complaint that we didn't draft Oliver Kylington instead, or Shillington, which is kind of funny. But at the same time, I was a big sort of fan um, of the Beauvillier pick. And I do, have high hopes. I kind of think of him. Hmm, I'm trying to think of like a player that I would then compare like what my hopes would be there. My hopes would be. Hmm, yeah, now I'm trying to think of like the proper player here or proper former Islander. Um, because I don't think because they really haven't had a actual scorer who was this guy who shot a ton, who wasn't this guy in front of the net. So you have Anders Lee, for example, who's a bit of a shot monster at times, but Anders Lee plays in front of the net constantly, and so you expect him sort of to get a whole bunch of shots on net from just deflections or just from being where he is. And Beauvillier doesn't play that way. Um, and I'm not going to compare him to like a Patrick Kane type player in terms of skill because it's a different level of player from inception. But I do see him. I think my hot take would be if I'm being optimistic. So let me give it hot take optimistic and hot take negative. My hot take optimistically is that he winds up being. Um, I'm going to respond to Backsmasher in a second because that's actually the person I was thinking of in a second. But my sort of like optimistic projection is he'd be a guy who puts up 45 points per game, and it's a solid back and forth possession player and smart and efficient. Um, defensively, that would sort of be like a France type, but at the same time, France wasn't really like a guy who took a lot of shots. And again, maybe that projection was wrong. Famously, from the Canucks' point of view, Bo Horvat was thought of as this great defensive player who would not necessarily be a great scorer, and then this year he turned out to be a great scorer who could not play a lick of defense. Um, so obviously the scouting reports can be different and can be wrong. So it's not necessarily right. So yeah, a France type would be sort of your optimistic type of thing there. Though I would think Matt Barzal might profile more as a better France type because I think he was more passer. Um, if I'm being negative, my negative hot take, so my worst outcome would basically be Jason Chimera. This guy who has these great flashes of speed, shows this tremendous skill at times, and then you look at the numbers and he's constantly being outplayed while he's on the ice. Even though you watch him, you think, well, he's gonna be good, right? He's doing all these things here. Clearly, he's great, but he's not. So that would be my negative hot take right there. Um, you can tell I love Jason Chimera. Um, yeah, not so good there. Um, so here's a question for you. While since I sort of answered Backsmasher's question here, um, who would you line him up with to start next season if he starts in the AHL? And would you line him up at center?
Um, so first of all, you're putting me on the spot to name our AHL roster, which is going to be its own particular challenge.
Well, I'm saying
But
assuming he's in the AHL, assuming it's in the NHL.
the NHL, so in the NHL, it's tough, and again, I think you do have to see how things shake out. I think for fun is you do the Next Generation Kids line and do him, Barzal, and Hosang and just see how it shakes out. But realistically, that's probably not the best idea. Let's see. If I have to put him on the line, in terms of skill set, in terms of role, it really is that middle six where, to be honest, putting him where he's been with that Strome and Nelson type does not seem like a bad idea. If I'm doing it from scratch at the beginning of this season, that's where I would have said he, largely belongs. And so, it's tricky to, come off of that beyond just hoping that Nelson turns it around and Strome has the breakout season that I predict for him every year. So I think, mentally going through it right now, you figure, at least to start the season, they should keep that, Bailey, Tavares, Lee line up top. And, for some reasons, I could see Beauvillier working well with Bailey. But at the same time, I think that top line is working so well and really was moving with such skill that it doesn't make sense to mess that up for Beauvillier's sake.
I think that's right.
So with that, I think you just have to mix and match between sort of those mid-level pieces you have. If you have Barzal, you have Hosang, and then you have sort of the original kid line guys of Nelson, Lee, Strome, then you see what works. I think you play around with that. You go with skill types, and I'm not opposed to at least shuffling those around to start, finding, who seems to be clicking there, and then riding with it for 20, 30 games and giving them a chance to get a feel for one another. Because you have this mix of guys whose, development hasn't gone perfectly with guys who are pretty young and coming into the team. And I would definitely keep them away from the, Cizikas, Clutterbuck, Kuhlman types, just because they're going out there with a different style and honestly a different goal and sort of that grinder fourth line role, that I don't think that that's where you want him. You want him with people looking to produce offense, looking to be more creative with the puck.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'd be kind of surprised if he doesn't start with Josh Hosang at the very least next year. So I think they, even though the numbers were worse for Hosang than with some other players, I think they like that line, and Beauvillier did seem to work better with that than other players. And I don't think Hosang will get a first line assignment right off the bat because Lee and Bailey were working too well. So I do think that's right. I do think you'll see Josh Hosang and Beauvillier and then another skill player. Who that skill player is, I don't know. I'd be kind of stunned if they put Barzal also there. I mean, it'd be a lot of fun. That'd be a hell of a line, but I just can't imagine them putting all three on the same line. But, who knows? Okay, so we have a question right now from Mr. Steven Naples. Do you think Bo has much value in the trade market right now? And I'll start with that. And I'm going to say, not really. I think coming into the season, he was thought of still as maybe your top 30 prospect, so that's still a valuable player. And certainly, it's what you think of as a first rounder still, so he hasn't lost value from his draft year. So obviously there's value in that. At the same time, I don't think that anyone will be bending over backwards to acquire him. So I don't think he acts as a centerpiece of any deal. Now, actually, the one thing that would artificially improve his value is that he is exempt from the expansion draft. So if the Islanders were to do a deal before the expansion draft, Bo might be considered more valuable because a team acquiring him would not need to waste a protection spot on him. So I do think, but for that same reason, I can't. The Islanders, who currently have protection issues, would need to see some sort of deal that involved Bo that was really worth their time, and I just can't see a player like that being where Bo matters that much. Like a player who would matter enough that the Isles would trade Bo is not the player who the opposing team is going to insist on Bo as the key element. And so I'm very skeptical that the trade value makes any sense.
Yep, I'd agree with that. I think his trade market value right now is not enough that you'd be happy with trading him. In a, one-to-one with him as a key piece, I think, like you said, it's not going to be anything world-beating. And if you add him to a package, sure, he increases the value of that package. But right now there's just so much uncertainty while we've been talking that, we've seen. We could see him, really on any line in the future to some extent. And so, with that much uncertainty, I think it's tough to find something you're going to be happy with. He does offer a lot of those extra bonuses of, not being expansion draft eligible and having that, cost protection on the ELC. But I still suspect there's going to be something sneaky happening given McPhee's associations with the Islanders in the past and the fact that the Islanders definitely do have a lot of pieces who are open. And so if we do see some sort of, draft pick for extra protection spot, then I will claim to predict the future. And if not, then I will claim it happened quietly behind scenes and still claim that I was right.
Right. Okay. By the way, the Seattle Thunderbirds, Matt Barzal's team, is getting blown out for their third straight Memorial Cup game. Jesus Christ. Anyhow, on topic here. So, not skipping your question totally, Mr. Backsmasher. I'll get to it in a second, but getting to someone who we haven't answered the question from. Asking if we see Bo as a top 6 forward the next few years here. I think both of us probably do. I think we both see right now as you're clear if you so projecting a couple years into the future, you're saying Tavares and Lee for sure as your top 6 forwards. You're hoping that Josh Hosang is in there, so that's 3. You're hoping that Matt Barzal's in there in a few years, so that's 4. You're probably hoping that Ryan Strome and Brock Nelson are in there, so that's 6. The differentiate the top 6 limitation is kind of silly. You like to have 9 or 12 highly skilled forwards. At the very least, if the Islanders insist upon playing a Cizikas line as your 4th line, you want to see 9 skilled forwards. And so the problem is, the Islanders basically had 6 at most last year, and then your 3rd line was just not good. And so if we're starting to see him on 3rd line, it's more the fact that you're hoping the Islanders rookies all pan out, all their kids play out, and that you wind up with basically Hosang is his top 9 core group. That's just incredibly strong. But that may be being optimistic, but it's really hard to know.
Yeah, I think I'd be similar, maybe a little bit more pessimistic than that. Not to dodge the question entirely, but I think lately I've been thinking more and more about it as you've got your top line and then you've got a middle 6 of people you're contributing, and I see Bo as almost inevitably being a part of that group, but as a very strong mid-6 contributor, somebody who's, really helping out those 2 lines and producing offense there. The one guy that I think, to some extent in terms of role, he compares to pretty decently, and I know this means a lot of different things to different people here in Islanders fandom, but I could see something similar to Josh Bailey, perhaps a little bit, better performance overall from Bailey, but that sense of jumping around between the 2nd and 3rd line, and then right now having found a good spot with Tavares and Lee, and really at this point last season performing as a top liner. I think you could see something similar to that with Bo with a little bit better performance in the middle 6. It's where I'd overall be happy with him. He's, a legitimate contributor and, at times able to jump in and move around and to be effective elsewhere.
That's an interesting comparison because I'm not really sure I'd buy that. If only because I think Bailey went straight from the draft to the AHL, so he was even younger than Bo was. But just looking at them back then, I think Bo actually, in some respects, as an individual shooting, was a very different player than Bailey was, even if he was less successful on the ice. I kind of think Bo, I guess this goes back to your original question here, I kind of think of him more, and this is again a middle 6 type thing, it's sort of more of like a Brock Nelson type than a Josh Bailey, which again, gets you stuck in the middle 6, can go to the top line, but I'm not really sure the Bailey comparison really works for him. Going back to Backsmasher's question, possibly the Isles go to Leafs route and play lots of young kids like Pulak, Taves, Bo, Barzal, and JHS. I think we'd be very surprised if Taves makes the NHL team, barring severe injuries. Older kids will certainly be more likely to be called up. But I do think if Pulak is still on this team, still in this organization next season, you'll see Pulak start in the NHL. Taves, just by the amount of defensemen they have, will be basically behind a whole bunch of guys. And again, I suspect you'll see Bo at the very least start the season in the AHL, just because that's how it is. And I'd be it'd be exciting to see them play all the kids, but they have a whole bunch of veteran forwards they don't seem likely to cut bait with, and so I feel very unlikely that both Bo and Barzal will start the season in the AHL. Hosang will, obviously. I think Hosang has earned his call. But I don't think Del Cal has, and I'd be very surprised if they go. I mean, the thing with the Leafs route is that they didn't really rush anyone. Nylander played in the AHL, so Nylander was basically already experienced in pro hockey to the point where Barzal hasn't been. Marner blazed through the CHL in his one draft plus one season. And so I guess he's sort of really like Barzal or Bo there. And then the other kids, they all were players who had a bit more, they were a bit more clear readiness than maybe Barzal and Bo are. And Taze really isn't in the same category. So I'm very skeptical the Isles go full on, especially with Taze. But the other four guys, I expect will make some contribution to the NHL next year, but they may not start the season as such.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that, and I know you, Garik, are not going to approve of any prospects on the defensive side other than Pulock coming up before Parker Witherspoon, years in the NHL of experience or not.
Exactly, clearly.
But I'd agree, yeah, those four I think will see NHL time, at least to some extent. But, as much as I think that that'll be beneficial, that'll be a positive sign, and this is a good group overall, it's not necessarily the same as Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, Nylander. You're looking at, a first overall pick, a guy who dominated juniors, and then a bunch of other pieces who really were very, very strong the year before in the AHL. And you saw, the Leafs minor league affiliates making runs there and really having that sort of performance. And while, there's reasons for definite optimism for the Islanders, you look at, that group, if the Islanders young kids were equivalent to the Leafs ones, and then you add John Tavares, it's a totally different ballgame. So I think it's fair to say that it's not, we have reason to see, sort of that youth, but not that same high-level role and high-level production from those guys.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so I think, barring any last-minute questions here, I think we've basically gone over our hour that we originally were planning. And so, I think we covered basically the basics here. Like I said, like we both said, I think we're both excited to see what happens with Bill going forward, recognizing that he had a pretty struggling season this year. And, there were flashes. It certainly looked good at times. It wasn't one of those players who both had dreadful stats and just looked dreadful. But there's clearly a lot of elements where he needs to improve. And so, hopefully, that happens. Any last thoughts?
I think that pretty much covers it. Definitely a guy with a lot of potential, and it'll be exciting to see, him moving forward. I think this Islander team has a lot of open questions moving into this new year with, youth contributions, with Wade as the coach for a full season. I think that he's going to be a pretty interesting piece of that whole puzzle we see over the year.
Okay, so thanks for watching, guys, and for those of you who watch this in archive, I hope you enjoy as well. Bye.